Welcome back. We're going to resume. Welcome to the Institute for Holocaust, Genocide, and Memory Studies at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. We're honored to be able to record this panel discussion. We've just screened the film Landscapes of Memory, The Life of Ruth Kluger, originally Spider-Leben, Ruth Kluger, a film from 2011. I'm extremely honored to introduce our panel. We have with us Ruth Kluger's two sons, Percy Angerus and Dan Angerus. And we have the director and author of this wonderful film, Dr. Renate Schmidkunst. Dr. Renate Schmidkunst has come to us all the way from Vienna, and we're grateful to be able to have this panel here. We've screened this film today for those people watching the recording as part of our symposium, The Legacy of Ruth Kluger and the End of the Auschwitz Century, 30 years of Weiterleben, of Still Alive, her memoir, and the symposium continues tomorrow on Wednesday with keynote addresses by Professor Sandra Gilman, Professor Irene Candace, and Professor Mark Gelber, followed by a panel discussion about the new book, The Legacy of Ruth Kluger and the End of the Auschwitz Century, edited by Professor Gelber, that is the proceedings of a conference about Ruth Kluger held 1 year ago. I'll be corrected on the details.
It didn't happen. A virtual conference.
Yes, a virtual conference.
Virtual conference that didn't happen. That's right.
Virtual fantasy conference.
We'll see that this
Best time, by the way.
But a planned conference that would have been for the 1 year anniversary of Ruth Kluger's death, and now the book appearing a little more than 2 years since Ruth Kluger passed away. But I don't want to get in the way of our wonderful panel, please welcome Percy Angerus, Dan Angerus, and Renate Schmidkunst.
I don't know if you need a microphone. Can you hear us?
It's fine.
You hear good, okay. Yeah. So all of a sudden I became a moderator. So I am happy to sit here with two people that were not only very important for this film, but in a way became also friends of mine. And I feel now like a sister sitting between my two brothers. So I started to make this, the filming of this film in 2008. This was when Dan came with his family to Vienna, and they joined the ceremony that you saw at the end of the film. At that time, I'm working for Austrian Television and Radio, and I asked my bosses, I want to make a film about Ruth Kluger, and they said, why should we see an old woman on television? So I decided to make this film by my own, and my dear brother gave me the first 25,000 euro, and I started to film because I knew I have to do it now, and this was a very nice occasion. How did you feel that at the time? Do you remember these days when we were filming and you were freezing?
I was freezing. I want to hijack this conversation for 1 second because I feel a little awkward talking about the movie and everything, and I know that I know a handful of you, but I'm curious how your interest in her life in terms of her academic achievements, or is there more to it than that? So that will help me sort of answer questions of her character and who she is and what she was like. But if I can, we're a small group here, so if we can have a conversation on them. I'm curious why you guys came here. What's the interest?
mean, I'll start, I think I did first was introduced to your mother's writing because I was working on the writer Kleist, and she had published on Kleist. But once I met her, then it turned into something else. I think a lot of us can say that. So I suspect other relationships in the audience were people who had professional contacts with her, but she was such an unusual human being. It was hard not to be drawn in and want to know her better, to the extent that she would let one in.
That's great.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Yeah, is this room largely journalists? Yes. No, not everybody.
I'd say we have a mixed audience of here, of some people who knew your mother, Ruth Kluger, well as a colleague or as a friend, or as an inspiring teacher or role model in the field. Others are students who have read her memoir, or are people who've come out of interest in her as a survivor author, as well as a scholar, a feminist, and poet.
So I'll lead with this. I forgot your question already, but I'll just give you a little bit of insight of how we grew up and how that translated to who she was. I think as a professor, I sat in a couple of her classes when she was at Princeton, and she was, how they have surveys of professors by the students, and the dean could care less about the surveys as long as they're publishing and as long as they're keeping the school in good stead. But she would come into her classroom with, we had a Labrador dog that she had, and the dog would come into the class, and it was just very casual, and the students were just extremely comfortable, and that was the environment that we grew up in. So when I was as young as 4 or 5, and she was a graduate assistant, we have people over to our house in Richmond. I guess I was up 6 or 7, and she didn't have a lot of money, but she'd buy a jug, was it a jug of Gallo wine? Maybe two jugs. And then boiled shrimp is what I remember, and peanuts. So that was the spread. And they'd all sit around in the living room and talk literature. And she'd invite us out, and we weren't relegated to the back room or anything. If we wanted food, we'd just come in. And so that transition from her being sort of the teacher, fast forward many, many years later, and Percy, actually, I hope I don't steal your story, but there was
Stop there.
there was a friend of mine who has a young son who was 7th grade and wanted to interview her. This wasn't that long ago, just a few years ago. And Percy was there, so he could verify this. And so this boy asked if he could interview Mom without having read any of her stuff, but had read about her, but not any of what she had written, but just about her. And he was very focused on learning about his Jewish heritage. And so they sat down, and his mother, who is our friend, is very mother henish in terms of trying to answer for her child and what her child is trying to say. And my mom just basically stopped her in her tracks and said, "I'm having a conversation with your son, not with you." And so that's how she was. She gave her full attention to whoever she was talking to, unless she was offended by him or bored with them, and then she'd get up and walk out of the room without saying anything. And that's the part that a lot of people remember too. But the point of this story is just simply that growing up, I saw that. She was the bookmobile lady who came to our school when I was in 1st grade, and she gathered all the kids and helped them find books, and she's very kind and caring about relating to individuals and having that one-on-one conversation. So, that's how I want you guys to think of her when you start reading her dissection of Kleist. And, you know,
Something to add?
I'm going to veer off in a slightly different direction, but off of your film, because one of the things that I recall about the film is that Renata was a good journalist and she asked the hard questions. And one of the things that I was interviewed about to some extent was a break I had with my mom in my mid-20s. She was, as Nancy, a very attentive mother. And I really was close to her when I was young. And as a young adult, we grew somewhat apart. No formal arguments or anything, but just a distance that grew. And at a certain point, I got fired as a son. I got a letter, a letter of ex-employment. And I'm joking about it now, but it's quite painful to have your own mom say, I don't want to have anything to do with you. And it lasted about 2 years, and eventually we repaired that. It took some effort on both sides. And the crime was simply being insufficiently attentive son, without going to, she didn't go into further detail on that, just said, I'm tired of this, I don't want to go further with it. And I think it ties into something in the film. She talks about how she's naturally suspicious. This is, I think, an artifact of her childhood that was part of who she was. And so I'm going 2 places with this. One is that Renata decided not to put that into the film, and I am eternally grateful because it's not really an important part of who she was, and it's no longer even an important part of my relationship with her, because it did get repaired, and it took quite a while. But toward the end of her life, for the last decade or more even, we had a very close relationship. And there's even a cap on that, which is, as I think many, perhaps all of you know, she had a stroke a little over a year before she died. And I'd hoped that she would have a miraculous recovery, because a friend of mine had a stroke and had a miraculous recovery, but that's not the normal path. And her path was more typical, as she slid into what was, plainly speaking, a dementia, losing all of the critical faculties that you can see in this film. But something positive came. This was during the pandemic, and at a certain point I moved down to her place to help take care of it. There was a daycare person during the day, 5 days a week. Dan would come down on weekends, and I moved in to also help. And during that time, she became a different person. We called it Ruth 2.0. She became very emotional, and this was off-putting because, as you know, in the film I described what it's like when you hug her. Her hugs are fast. I'm done. And she became very warm, and she would constantly say things like, I love you, which, is a common thing for mothers to say to their kids, but not for her. And it was, despite the loss of her critical faculties, it was really nice to see that come to the fore. And it was also interesting because I'd always assumed that was just a part of her that wasn't there. It had never developed. She spent the years that most of us spent learning social skills in a death camp. And what I discovered was underneath the armor, when the armor was removed, there was a very loving person. It was nice. Sorry?
It was new to me.
It was new,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
This was with 2.0. It was a different woman.
Well, if I should say what I experienced with Ruth is that when I first met her in 2000, in the year 2000, somebody came from my colleagues and said, hey, there comes a woman from Germany now, she lives now in America, she came from Göttingen on that day, and you should talk to her. And I was like buying the book, and I see myself sitting on my sofa in my nice apartment in Vienna, reading this book, and I couldn't stop it. Because I heard things for the first time that I hadn't heard I knew a lot of Holocaust survivors, mainly men, by the way, and I never heard a woman talking about the Holocaust the way she did, from the perspective of a child, but still being a woman who's writing that. And also putting the focus on being a girl and a woman. And that usually it would be men who would memorize the Holocaust or who would be witnesses of the Holocaust. And it was very important for her to be heard not only as a Holocaust survivor, but as a woman and as a feminist and a single mom with everything that she went through in her life. And this impressed me a lot. And then I decided to make a film about her, which was I made 2 films about her. The first film, which was only about childhood in Vienna. And we went to Prater, this is this, wie sagt man, Vergnügungspark? And, yeah. And we talked about black and white, for example, that when you see these pictures today, it's always black and white, but for her it was color. And in color, this was written on the benches, not for Jewish people, okay? So these philosophical conversations, or for example, I went with her to the sogenannte Sammelwohnung, I don't know how you say that in English, when Jewish people had to leave their apartments and were put together, like let's say 3 families in an apartment with 4
Communal
rooms.
apartments.
How do you-
Communal apartment.
Yeah. And this was shortly before they were deported. So we went to this house in Lichtensteinstraße 109 in Vienna, and she wanted to open the door, and then I filmed all this, then she wanted to open the door, and she said, no, I can't go there, let's go home. And I had some of these moments with her. Also we went to the DÖF, this is the Dokumentationsarchiv des österreichischen Widerstandes, and we were looking for something about your grandfather, because there is not so much, and we found something. And then through this film, people called her and said, we know something, and later she found people that could tell her more about what happened to his father, to Victor. Or for example, these moments when she was like kind of re-traumatized. I will never forget these moments, also with this film. So I followed Ruth for many years, and the colleagues of mine were mocking me. They would say, I didn't write about Ruth Krüger because I was making 3 radio shows with her, and I was writing, when I was asked who are you Mrs. Schmidt, what are you reading? I will always talk about Ruth Krüger. So, but now I can see that there is something like, there are radio and television programs about her. We can study that, and also the first film about her childhood in Vienna was very interesting. But then I had the impression that that's not enough to talk with somebody. How did you survive? Or how was it? Then I thought I have to make a film about wie geht das Leben nachher weiter? So how does life go on after you survived? Because usually nobody puts a focus on that. This is why it was important for me to bring the family in and to put her into relationship with those who were close. And some people she didn't want to appear in the film, like your father. I called him, I said, Mr. Andres, I made a film about Ruth, are you willing to contribute? He said, yes, I'm willing, yes. And then she said, you can decide. Or it's him in the film or me. So, yeah, you remember that, right?
I don't remember, but that's exactly how she said.
And then he died. And I have to say that I was very unhappy that I didn't interview him. But I think she would have skipped the project if I would have done that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes, and then, also during making the film, several times she said, you know what, it's enough now. And I had to say, I am the director. I say what is enough, not you. So she was in resistance on every level. And I also remember that when I got to know her, that I never dared to talk to her because I was afraid that I couldn't cope with her intellectual level And I knew that I should not make small talk to her. And also sometimes when we were filming, like when we were in Jerusalem 2011, you know, you sit in the evening after you finish filming, you sit in the hotel and you drink a glass of wine, and I was too afraid to talk to her because I was afraid that she would say, don't bore me, or what's...
She projected that.
But, what?
She did.
Yeah, she
Yeah.
projected that.
So I had a lot of Ehrfurcht, respect, I would say. But at the end, as you could see in the film, she did everything. I mean, she was walking for days with me, and she was very ill when we were in Bergen-Belsen because she had water in her body, and then she had the stent that was removed in 2009. So she was already very ill, and still she would do it. You know, she was zäh. How do you say that in English?
Tough.
Huh?
Tough.
Tough. She was tough. And I can say that after we finished this film, and then Percy came for the premiere, yes, and you can describe how many people and how much they were.
Well, this was the weird thing. You all know my mom because you're professionals in or related to her field, but she's not that well known in the U.S. Outside of certain circles. And in Vienna, I was sitting in the underground with her in the car, and a tattooed couple across the way would say, "We saw you on TV last night." She was, and well, you saw the reception, the film from the Ein Buch ein Stadt.
Yeah, Mr.
And it was like that during the premiere of the film. And she was.
Yes, and she, maybe not everybody read her books, but Ruth Krüger is in Vienna, she was always like a magnet. How do you say it?
Magnet,
A
yeah.
magnet. Yeah, so people would come, especially women, you know. And but the distributor of my film would say, well, one time in the cinema is enough, because ich kann das nicht auf Englisch sagen. Das ganze Publikum ist abgeschöpft schon nach einer Vorstellung. Also ist der Film nicht in den regulären Kinobetrieb gekommen. Who can translate that?
It's, the whole audience is going to be exhausted after one screening, and so we're just going to do it as a one-off.
Yeah, one-off. It never got into the regular cinema program. And this was not true. Wherever we showed the film, wherever the route came, or to meet, or to show the film together with me, there were so many people that they could have opened another hall to show the film.
So what do you attribute her celebrity status to in Vienna? So that is why? What is it about? What
I think, first of all, she was a really cool woman. I mean, you know, she would say things also in the parliament, the scene that opened the film, you know. She would say things that nobody else would say. She wouldn't play the game, by the way, also. She would not emerge into this, now we make this Holocaust, remember stuff. She knew exactly who meant it real and who did it because it was fashionable, I would say, you know. I would go so far. I would say that.
Okay, sorry.
No,
Go ahead.
please.
Okay, it fits really well with what you said, Percy, and I appreciate the way you said that. I would agree with you. If you go to Middle America and you say you're Kruger, the chances are nobody knows who you're talking about. But we had Yvonne as the keynote speaker at the German Studies Association, and Gail Hart, whom I'm sure all three of you know very well, and she's a dear friend of some of us. She was with Ruth when we issued the invitation. You know, she said she would only come if Gail came with her. So Gail was sort of next to her at all times over the course of several days. But the night your mothers were supposed to speak, there was a big banquet, and they were approaching their table, and this man came rushing up and practically knocked Gail out of the way and said, "Could I have your autograph?" You know, in German, of course, because he was Austrian, right? And Gail looked at him and just like, "What's your problem?" And he said, "You don't seem to understand. Your mother is a rock star."
Yeah.
You know, and sorry, your friend. I realized it was not her. He said, "Your friend is a rock star," you know. And Gail loved to tell this story because of just how well she was known. And I think She has a huge audience in Germany as well, actually, a
And-
very large
Oh,
number.
You
yeah.
know, a very simple answer to Mark's question is she wrote a best-selling book, a bestseller in Europe,
Yeah.
not a bestseller here. And that put her on the map
In the German
in
speaking
the German-speaking.
countries, yeah.
Yeah. But the American edition has done very, very well, and it's taught in a lot of
Yeah, no,
places,
I'm
a lot
aware.
of-
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, Sandy.
Yeah. No, I'm now going to be the devil's advocate, and I apologize in advance for this. Teddy Adorno told a story. True or not, it's a great story. He's in Frankfurt in 1953, and the dramatization of Anne Frank is on the stage. And he had gone to see it with great qualms. And as he is leaving the theater in Frankfurt, he walks out behind two elderly ladies, one of whom turned to the other and said, "She should have been allowed to live." There's a lot of that in Vienna. I'm sorry. Ruth is exemplary, right? She should have been allowed to live. I get very anxious when there's this kind of bizarre fame and nostalgia, which Ruth hated on a level beyond belief. It's all through everything she's wrote. It was all through the talk she always gave when she was in jail. So when people talk about her popularity, I always think about Teddy Adorno, who says, you know, and when one old lady said, at least she should have lived.
Yeah, but it's not exactly what I meant, because what I was talking about is that there were a lot of women, there was a big circle of women around Ruth, and they were for sure having preceded this history, and not this kind of people. And others, I think, you know, also young people were impressed by a woman that would talk like this. You could feel that she's intelligent, you could feel that she is sparkling, you know, you could feel that she dresses differently than others, that she has short hair, that she loves to eat and to drink, you know, and I can imagine how she
It's
looked like
relatable.
when she was smoking.
Yeah.
And all the students at the university in Vienna, but also admired her for that, you know, but of course you're right, that, and I had some occasions where I was observing that too, you know, that's something that happened in Vienna during this Waldheim. It started with this Waldheim affair, and then from there on, you know, it went on and on, that the city of Vienna especially made a lot of things to call these people back or to honor them through symposium and I don't know what. And not always I felt like they really meant it. Because if they would have meant it real, they would have behaved differently in their normal lives. And Ruth was she smelled that, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
No, I mean, I go back in Vienna to Kreisky, you know, whom I knew marginally. But he played that game. He played that game. He played the game of being both a political leader and the acceptable Jew. The acceptable Jew.
But it brought a lot of good things to Austria, believe me.
Another conversation for another time.
Yeah, another conversation. Then.
So I've changed the subject slightly, but I've seen this film, I think this is my fourth time, and every time I see it, there's something new that either I don't remember or that just sort of hits me. And this time around, what's the name of the literary critic? What's her name?
Sigrid Löffler.
Sigrid, right.
Sigrid Löffler.
And the way she describes my mother's ability to analyze and dissect the subtext of sentences, the way she phrased it was just brilliant, because that's exactly why I think she is attractive from the perspective of analytical literary analysis. And growing up, because I wasn't in this field, I didn't see that. But when I'm looking back at it, I realized that she did a lot of that, but one of the great things that she did with, at least with me, I don't know what Percy is, she would always ask, when I asked her a question, I remember taking a creative writing course my freshman year, and I was a terrible writer coming out of high school, just for whatever reason, American high schools, not great. And so I took a creative writing course, and I was always a creative writer, I just wasn't a good writer. And then I took this course, and I remember asking her what I could do to improve this particular piece that I was writing on, and she did not go in like a lot of parents would, which is, okay, you need to edit this out, you need to shorten this, you need to build on your character, whatever. She simply would ask questions. What do you want to do with this character? Where do you see this character? How do you feel this character develop, and how do you want to end this? And she wouldn't give me a pathway or anything. She just asked the question. So I go back and think about that, and that's how I think she approached a lot of things. She saw things that other people didn't see, and she got people to think about it. She didn't necessarily provide the answer. She just brought out the questions. So, and that's what I picked up on this one, this film.
And this, by the way, was the reason why I was so interested in roots, because I did, me myself, I have a family background that would not now automatically make me a person that, I now want to make a film about the Holocaust survivor. It was not my issue. It was this woman that was so intelligent. She was for me for many years, especially when I edited the film, I started to talk like Ruth Kluger, I started to form sentence like Ruth because everything was so pregnant, so significant, and this what I was interested in. I think a lot of women, or few men, I would say, you all included, and young people. This was a big asset. It's even not intellectuality. I would say her sparkling intellect. That was interesting.
I think it's one of the real strengths of the movie, actually. That the movie really allows us to see what an engaging mind she had.
Yeah.
And she's constantly, expressing ideas and thoughts and the complexity of those thoughts and negating them. She's an exceedingly refined thinker. And it comes across beautifully in the movie.
Thank you.
In that scene in Bergen-Belsen where she's talking, and you can see her ramping up, and she's looking down, and these thoughts are just flowing out of her, and she's just narrating what somebody would just take notes on. And that's how she was.
And she taught me a lot. For example, Bergen-Belsen, when she stands in front of these plates and there's written the sentences, and she would say, there are kind of sentences, what? And I thought so often about these things in my life. Also that, for example, how she sees Israel, that she would talk about a just country